Hey, how's it going, everyone? And welcome back to our Lovecraft recap show here over on the FilmSpeak channel. We're going to be recapping Season 1, Episode 7, titled I Am. I'm, of course, your host, Griffin Schiller, and here at FilmSpeak, we like to say the conversation continues after the credits. And, of course, if you want to be a part of that conversation, you're definitely in the right place, so consider subscribing to the channel for more insight, analysis, and interviews behind your favorite movies and television. So before we go any further here, be sure to jump down in the comment section and let us know what you thought of tonight's episode. Did you love it? Did you hate it? It is a wild trip, so I'm sure that we're going to have a lot to talk about down there, so be sure to jump in there with all your thoughts and theories and all that good stuff. As always on this show, I am joined by Elliott from Movie Files. How's it going, buddy?
Good, man. How we doing today, man?
Not bad. I'm very excited to talk about this episode because I think across the board we're going to have there'll be a little bit of overlap in opinion, but I think for the most part we'll have three sort of different opinions on what exactly on like how we feel about this episode. So I'm looking forward to that.
Same here, man. There's definitely some things to discuss in this episode, to say the least. Yeah, excited to break it down. Some big reveals too, man, that we'll get into. But very excited to hear your thoughts and also Gretchen. So let's get into it, man.
Yeah, for sure. And you mentioned Gretchen. We were also joined by my good friend Gretchen Smale, who is a staff writer over at Bustle. Gretchen, how are you doing?
I'm doing amazing, and based on that intro, I think I'm the one who loves it.
Yeah,
I'm excited to discuss.
Right, which is interesting because when I first was like texting you about the episode as I was watching it, you were like, "Yeah, I don't know how I felt about this. I don't know if it like entirely worked for me." And then you just literally, like 20 minutes before we started this, you're like, I think I love it. And I'm like, damn it, maybe I needed that rewatch to just sort of solidify my feelings on the episode. But I guess speaking about just, overall thoughts on the episode, Gretchen, let's start with you. What did you think of tonight's episode? What do you think some of the strengths were, some of the weaknesses were, overall takeaway?
So I know it's very campy on the surface. Like, I think that was one of my first main critiques when I watched it, but I watched it 3 times. So the first 2 times I was watching it from a very critical perspective. I was writing articles for Bustle. And then I watched it again literally like an hour ago with my dad, and he was just having the best time watching it. Like, to him, it was wild. It was fun. He was laughing a lot. And I was just like, oh my God, maybe I was being too harsh on it. So I realized that even though, yes, it is very corny and it flies, literally off the rails a lot.
Yeah,
I think the main theme of it is it explores how when you're a marginalized person in America, you really have to shrink yourself in different ways and give away parts of yourself. And I actually think from that angle, the episode's very satisfying because it really does that with quite a few characters. So in the end, I loved it.
Yeah, well, when you take that into account and specifically going to the end, you're right. I guess that she had to make the sacrifice in order to be there for her kid and all that stuff. She could have lived her life, gone on all these adventures and, whatever in the... I don't even know what that was, like another dimension, the cosmos, whatever. But you're right. She had to make sacrifices, which actually that was something that the more I was sort of sitting on, that part I sort of came around on. So yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. But Elliott, going over to you, sort of just like overall thoughts on the episode.
Yeah, so I'm kind of right with Gretchen, where I've only seen it once, and it was yesterday. And when I watch this show, it's kind of with the analytical, critical thought when I watch it, but at the same time, I'm very entertained by the show. So I'm kind of in the middle in regards to really. So what I loved about it was Hippolyta's story. Seeing like Gretchen just kind of touched on her reclaiming her name, and that is kind of, we talk about the anthology format and maybe not getting all the answers that we're looking for. But one thing that has been a consistent through line is our characters rediscovering themselves and redefining themselves for who they want to be, not who their parents want them to be or Magic wants them to be or the Gia's character. So I'm loving these characters. It's a very, I don't say challenging show, but it is a very challenging idea to, as an audience member, we watch shows like this to get those answers from who's Captain Lancaster, what's the idea with the Sons of Adam. We want to know all those questions, but we're seeing these beautiful strokes by Misha Green and these actresses who I think the show focuses so heavily. It does a great job of telling these stories of women, and it's written by women, and it shows the empowerment of women. So I'm loving that through line. That's where I'm really just appreciating what we're getting on the show. And we were talking about it yesterday, Griffin, regarding the overarching theme. I think when we look at this as a whole, we'll see that through line of just a beautiful story being told by all these different perspectives of women's, of being shrinked and being called a monster from Gia, Letty and her mom and her sister Ruby. It's just so many different pieces you can take away from all these characters. I think that is the satisfying aspect of the show. And then, of course, when you throw in aliens, you throw in time travel, we get some big reveals with Tick and Letty. I mean, this show to me is just, I think it's one of those things where you're in the moment, but when you step yourself away from the moment, you can appreciate what they're telling on the screen. So I really enjoyed this episode, to say the least.
Yeah, for sure. I liked it. I'm still sort of up in the air as to how much I liked it. I think I agree with you. I think thematically the exploration of marginalized women reclaiming their own narrative and reclaiming their own identity is very present throughout the entire show, and it's very powerful. And especially this one, while it's a little too on the nose for my liking, it's still wacky and fun and trippy, and you could tell that the showrunners, like Misha Green and the directors and everyone, they were having fun shaping this episode, because the whole time travel aspect of it allowed them to, well, it wasn't even time travel, it was like I use time travel loosely. It was like I don't even know, alternate history stuff, but like they kind of use that to just like Hippolyta, who is very she's always wanted the adventure in her life, to be able to go on these journeys with George, because she's just as capable as he is. For her to actually go on a adventure like this through time, I thought was really powerful, and stuff. So I enjoyed the boldness of it, but I also think that I don't know. It was just very, like, from the name of the episode title to what we were seeing and everything, it was just very like, okay, yes, this is obviously what's happening here. There wasn't as much nuance as I would have hoped for. I do think the one scene that we did get a little bit more of, that I thought was actually beautiful, was the scene between Hippolyta and George,
who made a return. He made a return, by the way. Yeah,
right. We get Courtney B. Vance back. Yeah, exactly. And I think this is going to be the last time that we see him, only because she sort of like closed the door on that whole thing. And I thought that conversation that they had, that was needed, because we hadn't. The more I sat on it, the more I kind of warmed up to that one. But it was like, when I initially watched that, it didn't quite work for me, because we hadn't seen the two of them. We hadn't really seen their relationship prior to this, so I didn't necessarily like feel as much as I wanted to. That being said, I do think it was a beautifully acted scene. It was necessary for her character, and again, this sort of it like closed the book on George's arc and allowed her to just sort of like come into her own without the shadow of George sort of like looming over her. So I don't know how you guys particularly felt about that scene, but Gretchen, let's start with you.
Yeah, I thought that was the most significant moment in her weird, I guess, galaxy hopping trip. I think the whole journey was her realizing that she has silenced herself for so long. I think you do get like the briefest hint in episode 1 that she is an adventurer, like you said, but George is like, oh, just stay home, be safe. And then in episode 4, the museum, you find out she named a star, but another a white person got the credit, and Dee was like, well, why didn't you fight for that? And she's like, oh no, it's fine. So like you do get these hints that she's someone who has allowed herself to be boxed into the perfect deferential like 1950s woman, and then I think the scene with George was her finally admitting maybe she didn't want to be a housewife or even a mom, like maybe she didn't want to be stuck to the home. I think she wanted to maybe be someone cultured, like, you know, Josephine Baker going to Paris, someone who lets her rage out, like the warrior women and the tribes. So I guess it was a way for her to let go of George, but it was also a way for us to let go of George too, I think, because we brought this up like every podcast episode, like, when is he coming back? Like, we miss him. And I think hearing it from her, she's like, yeah, I mean, she loved him and he was a great guy, but she felt so limited by their relationship. And I think Elliott was right. Misha Green's thing is always like, it's all about the women in this show. And it was just the final, I think, like, character that you needed to see. Like, all these women have so much rage bottled up because their prospects in life have been so you know, limited and shrunken down. So I really like that. I thought it was a way to finally say goodbye to George. But I will also say, I don't know if he's gone officially, because at the end you see Tick holding Lovecraft Country, which was written by George. So Hippolyta wasn't there at the end. So maybe it was a way of both bringing him back, but also saying maybe Hippolyta's not interested in this relationship anymore. I don't know, but I thought it was really interesting.
Yeah, that's a good point that I didn't necessarily think about the ending of it. Yeah, it's like, where is she, you know, now? Elliott, going over to you.
Yeah, no, that was going to be my point. Was I think that we haven't seen the last of Uncle George, because again, just her, and I guess we call it time travel. So I am to all my history of time travel movies and shows like Dark. That scene where she goes to another dimension, are we assuming that her self wasn't in that dimension, or she was reliving that first episode that we saw in episode 1 when they had, you know, when we first met George and Hippolyta? So I'm not sure if he's gonna tag along on these different journeys of getting back to, I don't know, bringing him back into our parallel Earth. I don't know. So we'll leave that scientific aspect of the show aside. But no, I think, like Gretchen would say, I think we haven't seen the last of him, whether it be the Tulsa race riot that we're going to probably visit. And I would assume we're going to maybe see where Tick went. I assume that we've been theorizing that Tick might be the one that had saved Uncle George and Montrose, and also we found out about his cousin. So I think we're going to get that storyline and maybe him altering time. George becomes a book writer and tells these stories of what he heard from his wife and heard from now his nephew. So we'll see what goes on with all that. But that scene in particular, I thought it was beautiful to see, you know, Hippolyta tell him how she felt all this time, that she thought that he looked at her in a certain light where she can grow, but it was just more or less being content of where she is as a person, where she is in life. And she kind of, in a way, unintentionally, George kind of helped her in the process of becoming less of the person she wants to become, which is I am Hippolyta, right? She's not Hippolyta Freeman. She is her own person. So I thought that scene was beautiful. And again, seeing her become the explorer, the discoverer as she is within this episode was really cool to see. And again, going back to just the idea of these stories being told in the lens of a Black person, being written by a Black person, starring these Black people, this is just things we've never seen before. So I think it is kind of breaking new ground in that sense too. So really, really great stuff.
Yeah, I agree. And the other thing that I think made that scene a little more powerful was the placement of it, right? So she did the whole thing with Josephine Baker, which was her first step into reclaiming her own identity. Then she literally becomes Hippolyta, you know, in, you know, mythology or whatever, and she's fighting the Confederate soldiers, which I think that was so good. That reminded me of the opening to episode 1, you know, the weird sort of like space travel. Actually, holy shit, I'm just thinking about that. What if that opening to episode 1 is where Tick went? Like that whole experience of him in the war with like the Cthulhu and then like Jackie Robinson coming in, like it was told to us as a dream, but like what if that is like, you know, sort of alluding to the fact that he went in this just like, you know, cosmic sort of adventure. And I don't know, do you guys buy into that? Am I crazy?
Going again to the time travel mythology of like, you know, you disrupt the timeline. Remember, Tick threw a white police officer in that portal. So maybe he has some influence of like, you know, he knows of Captain Lancaster. Maybe he's disrupting the time travel as well. So you might be right into that point that they disrupted some type of multidimensional continuity, and now that's kind of been matched up, we're going to see aliens and Confederate you know, people fighting, and these Egyptian queen tribe warriors fighting. So that might be the finale. Who knows?
I don't know. Gretchen, what do you think?
I would love that. I like the prospect that maybe George is alive and we are building up to this huge family team up of them maybe doing something really wild. Like, I think it's important that they said they lost maybe the Book of Names, I think, in the riots, right? Or
Oh
was that
yeah,
just
that was no. I think
They
that's
burnt everything down. Yeah.
right. Yeah.
Yeah. So that to me was a hint that maybe they will actually time travel back there, get it,
Yeah.
or because of what Hippolyta did or what George did, even. I don't know. It's back in the present. I mean, I don't really know at this point, but it seems like there's enough threads there to make it really weird. And we also have like Gia hanging out in Korea,
Right.
assumedly kind of like watching over Tick. So the fact that he has like the supernatural being out there too, I mean, it really could go anywhere from here.
Yeah. Well, and the orrery. We got to talk about that because that's that's a big part of this episode, and we understand now that we understand why Christina wanted the orrery, because now that would allow her. I mean, that gave Hippolyta the key to completing what was it, Haram's time machine or something like that. And so, given the fact that we understand what that is now, I mean, what do you think Christina wants to do with that? What do you think she wants to do just in regards to like time travel or whatnot?
I don't know. Was Gretchen? You might have said this in one of our early reviews that you think that Christina's plan is to maybe like go back in time to Adam and Eve and change that whole scenario of instead of for Eve eating the apple, maybe it's Adam and women having more. Again, I think the show is leading towards women being more of
100%.
In the situation that they are in history, they are more prominent. They're the leaders of the world. So I think that may be an angle that Christina wants to go down, and we kind of see that in this episode that she has, as Gretchen said, these women have rage, and her initial plans were to get revenge on her fallen lover, which was William, but at the same time also prove something to her father. But in the midst of doing that, she discovered that that's the last thing on her mind. So I think, she's going to go back in time and definitely mess some stuff up and change the course of history.
Yeah, well, and actually, before we go to Gretchen, I think it's an interesting comparison of seeing like a white woman's rage compared to the rage of that of marginalized women who we have Gia in Korea, we have Ruby, Letty, and in Hippolyta, and we've seen all of that. So I'm thinking that we'll probably get like a Christina centric episode, because just given the pattern of this, these single episodes focused on women, their rage and like reclaiming who they are. I have to imagine she's next in line. Whether or not it'll be like the next episode or the episode after that remains to be seen. But Gretchen, going back to you.
Yeah, I still think it is. Elliott gave my theory, but
it's a good theory.
Idea that she probably. Thank you. Yeah, I do think she's trying to do something wild. And I also think about the monsters that she was birthing in episode 1. It makes me wonder if that came from, I don't know, another planet or something. Like, was there a time when they were using that machine to bring in creatures from other planets or something? Is that part of her goal that she wants to open? I don't know. Maybe this is 2 Avengers, but like open a portal to another planet and do something with that. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. That would be that would certainly explain like where maybe there is like specifically a Lovecraft planet where like all of these weird sort of creatures and stuff live, and then she just like brings them there or something like that. And maybe that's where Tick went on his journey. Which actually that's going to be my next question. Do you think next week we're going to get an explanation as to where Tick went while Hippolyta was doing her whole thing? Elliott, starting with you.
So I'm looking up. So next week's episode, which is episode 8, Jigga Bobo. So that's going to be, we're theorizing that's going to maybe center around Emmett Till and the tragedies that happened in Mississippi in 1955. So there is that to be looked at. But I think, again, going back to where Tick went, there may be some correlation of him altering time and changing that. But in changing that obviously changes the course of what sparked the civil rights movement. So it'll be really interesting to see again where that thread, that altering of time kind of affects their current situation and things of that nature. So yeah, I think we're definitely going to see where Tick went, but I think there's going to be a huge influence on Emmett Till being a prominent figure in that episode of next week's episode.
Yeah, for sure. Well, maybe he went to maybe that was one of the things, he like traveled back in time or something for that. Do you think that there's any sort of possibility that could be something?
Yeah, I mean, knowing that this show does kind of take a couple weeks off of its storyline, so the week after that, episode 9 is actually titled Rewind 1921. So we might get that kind of singular episode 8, and then we go back to what happened with Tick, and then full circles episode 10. So maybe we'll get that, explanation of some of those things. But I think we will eventually see where Tick went and why Uncle George has a book and things of that nature.
Yeah. So while Gretchen is restarting her router at the moment, let's touch on some of the stuff that happened towards the front half of this episode. So I thought what was interesting about this is that it was a direct continuation off of what happened in episode 5. We got the one-off sort of like single adventure thing, or I guess it was like it took place in the past with Gia and everything. Yeah. But now we're kind of like back on track here, and so Ruby has her confrontation with Christina and is sort of like feeling weird about the whole situation. She doesn't even know if like Christina has like actual feelings for her or whether she was just using her. And then it's revealed to us that Christina may in fact have some sort of emotional attachment to Ruby. Now the question is she just saying that because she's snake-like and we can't necessarily trust her, or do we actually think that there is some sort of emotional connection there? And then Ruby, does she reciprocate that? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that was an interesting scene, man, because I think with Christina, what she said to Ruby was, everything I said to you was true. Now, the means of how we developed this relationship might have been kind of suspect, her sleeping with Ruby. And I think this whole theme, again, we were talking about Possessor, about bodies being so disposable. That was her way of like getting emotionally connected to her, was in a form of sex, right? But it maybe didn't mean that to Christina, but in a way, obviously, Ruby might reciprocate in a different manner. But I think that was more in lines of like, yes, I used you. I literally used a body, and the whole metamorphosis idea of like using your body to get what you need in certain positions, and her being a woman versus when she's a man. So I think there was some undertone of like she connects to Ruby because she sees her being, she's not fully using the potential of who Ruby wants to be as a person. So she saw maybe some similarities of Ruby and Christina, but I think it's still a mixed bag of Christina, of her true intentions versus manipulating situations. And we'll talk about it a little bit later, but I think Ruby is starting to get intel from, Letty later in the episode when she's talking to her in the kitchen about, you this and the third. So I think, I don't know, man. I think Ruby is starting to understand a little bit of what Christina's trying to accomplish, and maybe have her own agenda at the same time.
Yeah, that's true. And in that sequence, going back to like Christina sort of explaining everything, like, I did use you and everything like that. I thought we got a good, obviously we've sort of been toying around with what exactly is her plan here. What is her intention? And I thought that she gave a pretty good sort of like explanation as to what she's trying to do, about the fact that she had these abilities and she was forced out of the order because she was a woman. And so, her only way to get anywhere, and going back to like, I think episode 5 or whatever, where we were talking about this, the only way she was able to get anywhere was by taking the form of William, who we see that she has the body of him down in the basement of her house, I guess. Now, correct me if I'm wrong. Was he dead, or was he? Okay, so it was his dead body, and so that's how she was able to transform. And so now we do have clarification on the fact that in order for someone to take the form of another person, that person has to be dead.
Correct. Yeah, she did specifically say that. Yeah, they are dead. You know, their bodies are just being used. We're using their blood for the potion. So yes, you have to be dead in order for your body to be used as this vessel, this magical spell. So again, that opens the door for a Samuel character who died in episode 2. Yeah. And again, Uncle George potentially, or other characters that have died, they might be able to use their bodies and pretend to be them.
So do you think that this gives us any sort of indication as to who that person was that was locked in I'm blanking on his name, the
Captain Lancaster?
Yeah, Captain
So it's those little threads that we've yet to get a full understanding of what's going on with certain things in this aspect of the show. I don't know if that has anything to do with the potion and impersonating someone. I think that's more of whatever Lancaster's doing with the whole black torso and them doing this Frankenstein, experimenting with bodies and using people's body parts to infiltrate, the black community. And obviously we know Captain Lancaster was in cahoots with Epstein to do these experiments on black people. So I think he's still doing experiments, and that's kind of his own lodge and his whole situation. So I still don't think we've gotten a full understanding of who that guy was in the closet and how significant his role is.
Yeah, for sure. I agree. Okay, so moving over to Tick and Letty and their whole encounter with Montrose, which we'll get to in a second, but I want to sort of like the fact that they both had the same dream, right? So they had the same dream of what am I blanking? What's her name again? It's like
Hannah.
Yeah, I was about to say Hannah. So they both had the same dream, and Gretchen is back, so we get to talk about this with her.
I'm so sorry.
No, this is totally fine. We're just talking about we talked about the Ruby Christina stuff, and now we're sort of moving on to Letty and Tick and the reoccurring dream that they both had. Obviously, sort of in that dream, we saw it with Tick in episode 5, and in this one we see it with Letty holding her stomach as like fire is sort of surrounding her and whatnot. I think that was kind of an obvious nod to her being pregnant with Tick's child, but also they were talking about the fact that Hannah may have escaped and is lurking somewhere around as God knows what, and that she's trying to send them a message or something, or direct them or whatnot. So Gretchen, we'll start with you. What did you sort of make of that initial encounter, and then also learning about more information about the Book of Names and stuff?
Yeah, I thought it was very satisfying finally learning that they are looking for the book. I know for like the longest time we were like, is it the book of Undead Names? Is it a book? Are they looking for pages? So it's nice finally to get that clarity. I had a hard time deciphering what that meant, the dream. I thought it was maybe Tick's bloodline is very powerful, and now that it seems like Letty is pregnant, that connection is letting her kind of speak to Hannah in a way. I don't know if that's really what it is. I had a hard time figuring out why she suddenly was able to see Hannah. I never thought of the idea that maybe she's still alive somewhere, so that's really interesting to me. But I did like Tick's whole journey to go meet his one other living family member. So to me, it fed back into the whole thing we were talking about with Hippolyta, where she's had to shrink herself and give away parts of herself. I think it's going back to the idea that like his family was like, they could have been this really established family that has magic and has this great, history, but that whole thing was just cut off in the massacre. So now it's like this once great family is just gone and they don't have that connection to this book anymore. So to me, it fed all back into the fact that America really is not a good place for everyone who isn't white. And they're all trying to survive in their own ways. And they're all trying to like draw connections back from the past and then figure out how they fit into the present. And I thought it was another great way of bringing that idea back of Hippolyta finding herself in this society.
Yeah. Well, then would you, do you think that if Hannah possibly has got, if she is out there somewhere in some capacity, that maybe what she's trying to do is allow that family to reclaim their rightful place just in society, since they were silenced and they kind of just like sacrificed that part of who they are for so long.
I would love that. I mean, I think that'd be really interesting if you get this whole, I don't know if this is supposed to be like a several season show, but I like the idea that if they have this big show off with Christina, that later they I don't know, revive the old family members, or they finally get the book, or they're able to go back in time, something, but being able to see that whole family, and it becomes like this magical Harry Potter type thing, I think is really fun.
It's very Harry Potter, yeah, for sure. Elliot, what are your thoughts on that whole part of it?
Yeah, man, that like Gretchen said, that was a very somewhat confusing situation. But I think, with Hannah, and I think a couple weeks ago when we saw that first time, Tick had that dream, it sounded like she was saying something like Gretchen said, something about it's in your blood, and this idea that Letty, Letitia, and Ruby have the same mom, but they have two different dads, might allude to some connection to Letitia having a father that is a part of the Sons of Adam, right? Or, we know that Titus slept with his slave, so it could be some great-great-great-grandmother of Letitia who has some connections to Hannah or some matter, and they're somehow related in some way, in some matter. As we know, Tick, that's his his great-great-great-grandfather, and that might be the same for Letitia. So I think there is some type of warning there in regards to Hannah telling them that it's in your blood, but also to not sleep with each other because you guys are related. And we'll see what comes of this scene of Letitia now having, like you mentioned, Griffin, it's pretty obvious that they were hitting that she has an expected baby with the scene of spaghetti and tasting things and smelling and having things.
That's really interesting that you mentioned the fact that she's basically telling them don't sleep with each other because you're related, because I feel like I don't know, I guess I'm more inclined to be thinking sort of what Gretchen was saying about the fact that now that she's going to give birth to, I guess, the child of this bloodline. She is now technically part of this bloodline. And so that's why they can now have that sort of connection. And obviously with her and Ruby talking about the fact that it's like, oh, maybe you have like a little, handyman junior inside of you or something like that. And then you're right, she tastes the spaghetti and she gets really nauseous and stuff like that. I think like she's 100% pregnant with their kid. That's interesting to think about. Is this like a forbidden love that is actually going to do more damage than good?
Damn, I hope they don't go that route. I
do too. That would be awful.
I never thought of that angle. I have to say I hated it when they did it in Game of Thrones, and I think that whole incestuous thing should die forever. Like I don't.
What is it with HBO and incest? Come on,
man,
what is this?
There is some higher up there that needs a talking to. I don't know what it is. He's green lighting everything that has it, but
yeah, right. That's Oh man, I don't. Yeah, I agree with you. I don't think that would sit right with me.
Yeah, you get a little baby Joffrey coming out with.
No, let's not. Let's not. Let's distance ourselves from Game of Thrones as much as possible. So I guess then going from there, the next part where we got some more information was Tick and Letty visiting Montrose, and because I'm awful with names, why am I blanking on the bartender's name again? Sammy.
Yeah,
right?
Sammy.
Yeah, Sammy. So they go to visit Montrose's house, and when they get there, Sammy is leaving because obviously Montrose is putting up walls again, and this isn't, obviously it's indicated that this isn't the first time it's happened, and he won't let Sammy love him for some reason. It was really interesting because before watching this episode, I watched The Boys in the Band on Netflix, which deals with a lot of what Montrose is going through in this episode, which is the fact that he is a gay man who kind of resents the fact that he is a gay man, and so he took it out on Tick as a kid, and so Tick seeing Sammy leave. And understanding that all those years of torment and trauma is the result of Montrose just like being unhappy with who he is, and so he's just letting him have it. That was a really powerful and sad scene, Gretchen, I guess your take on that whole encounter and the revelation there?
Yeah, I like to compare it to the scene actually where Hippolyta was in Paris. And I don't know if you noticed, but in the background it showed. So Josephine Baker actually dated Frida Kahlo in real life. And that's who that woman with, obviously the unibrow was, who gave like the brief toast. And so I think it was showing that like in Paris, for example, it was more, I don't know if it was more socially acceptable to be gay openly, but there was like a more open society there around that. There was more culture around that. But in America in the 50s, I can't imagine that there was any acceptance around that. And I think, again, feeds back into the theme of Montrose is a marginalized queer Black man, and he hates it. And he has a lot of internalized homophobia. There's no freedom for him in the society to express himself. And he's terrified of even his neighbor like a random neighbor seeing a man coming out of his house, which could mean anything, it could be like a friend, but he's so terrified of that. I think it just, again, is Misha Green saying America sucks, honestly. Like it sucks a lot in the 1950s. It honestly sucks now. And like, but in other countries, it maybe wasn't that way. And I think all these characters are just feeling that squeeze and that restriction of like, they can't actually be who they are. So then they're enacting these like horizontal oppressions, like Montrose beating Tick and Tick using like a slur against his father. And it's just like, it's very sad. Like they can't be themselves.
Yeah, it is interesting. And I thought, I know when we were originally talking about this and talking about the fact that, when Tick finds out, is he, because of like his time in the war and how he grew up, is he going to be homophobic and like lash out on him for being a homosexual? But in fact, it wasn't quite that. It was the fact that his father took it out on him. He took out his repressed sexuality, I guess, on his son. I think that was what struck a nerve with him more than the fact that his father was actually gay. So that to me was sort of like a nice surprise with that. Elliott, going to you though.
Yeah, and another thing, Tick, again, he was raised to not be soft, but then knowing that the guy that beat him all these years, not necessarily but knowing that he wanted to prevent his son from being gay, essentially not being soft, and now knowing that his father is gay is definitely really in his head, and just really kind of makes him look at his whole relationship with not only his dad, but then he finds out that his mom knew about it. So that even puts another layer of like this, my best friend who and that's another thing. We have yet to find out how Dora died. Is she really dead? What was the situation with George? So that is another big storyline that we have to explore, hopefully sooner rather than later. But yeah, just finding that out all within a matter of seconds has to just be, a mind trip. And another thing, Montrose isn't still off the hook for me personally with, Yahima. We still don't know his reasons. We assume he killed her thinking that he was protecting his son, but I still think there is a little bit of understanding of his intentions of doing that. And again, another form of how he assumes he's protecting someone is killing somebody, and assume he's protecting his son from becoming gay by beating him. His perspective and how he, his thought process is really kind of messed up, to say the least. But yeah, man, it was a big scene because we all been waiting for it to see how Tick would react to the news, and it was a great acted scene by two incredible actors, obviously. But it just really kind of opens the door to just figuring out again this whole angle with Dora and she knowing the situation, and again was this a arrangement between her and George that since she couldn't love her husband, her pretend husband who was pretending to be a straight man, that she fell in love with her brother or so. A lot to explore still within that Tick, Montrose, George, Dora storyline, but a really great scene is no less.
Yeah, no, I agree. What are the odds that you think that maybe Dora died in one of the massacres that we're gonna sort of explore, in one of those like precursors to the jumps, the spark of the civil rights movement and stuff like that?
I don't know if the timing works out. Like, do you mean like the 1921 one?
Yeah.
I think that because this is like the 50s.
55. Yeah, it would have been 34 years ago.
Yeah, it might not necessarily work.
I guess it depends on how old Tick is, but.
Right. Well, and I guess it also depends just on like the whole time travel aspect of it. Like if there was a way, right. I mean, I have to imagine that they've known about these abilities for like a long time, and maybe they've like jumped back in time before, which I think you get a sense of that through Montrose, that he's like familiar with the magic and whatnot that sort of is in his family. So I mean, I don't know. But yeah, I don't know. It was just, you know, something that sort of like crossed my mind on it. Okay, so I guess any final thoughts on the episode before we close this out?
I think the another thing that we kind of may have found out in regards to, you know, Tick's cousin, you know, when he goes to Bertha, I think her name was, in St. Louis, you know, he shows her the photo album. He sees his cousin. She has a similar birthmark to what he has. So there is some connective tissue there with this similar birthmark. And, you know, maybe that's, again, we know that this family has magic. Maybe Hannah has been able to find ways of continuing to stay alive and using people's bodies. She might be the cousin, who knows? She might be Dora for all we know. So who knows what's all going on there? But I guess another thing that we left off on with the whole Mayfield time machine is, you know, Diana left. Well, unfortunately, Hippolyta forgot that her daughter's comic book was left in that area, and the comic book was left under that police officer, and it has her name on there. So I think we're going to get some people visiting, you know, the Freeman family with that, you know, murder scene there, not knowing that it was self-defense, but, you know, obviously they're black people, so they're going to assume that they killed people in vain. So it'll be really interesting to see where that goes. But I'm questioning for you guys, just kind of going back to the first scene when we see Hippolyta go into Arnhem. Did you guys find that to be a missed opportunity, to her running into the creatures, running into police officers, that she just went to Arnhem and nothing happened? She went to a sundown county and nothing came of that. The fact that she, not necessarily the creatures, like that was fine, although I'm not quite sure where that village was in relation to, like, you know, the actual estate or whatever, so that was a little weird too. But yeah, the fact that she didn't encounter any police violence or prejudice or whatnot, given the fact that it is a sundown town, was a little like, really? Okay. And I'll give them a little leeway because it looks like half their police force was killed in episode 1. Maybe they don't have, I mean, back then they didn't have a full assault of police officers, so maybe half of the police force is dead after episode 1. But I just thought it was like a missed opportunity to kind of explore, you know, 2 black women going to this racial town, and nothing came of it. So I thought that was maybe a missed opportunity, but maybe, I don't know.
Sure. Gretchen?
Yeah, I think sometimes not that we want the show to be fully about like racial trauma all the time, but I do think that aspect drops out when it's convenient for the story. Like I brought up with Griffin, like, you know, I guess he is just living in that house now, having smashed the windows of those people, and I guess no one's bothered them since then because it
3 people are missing, 3 white men are missing.
So I don't like, I love the realistic horror with the cosmic horror. I don't know if they gel that well.
That was that's going to be my big complaint coming out of this episode, which is the fact that I like that we can get campy and weird and stuff with this episode and everything that happens with Hippolyta, but I don't necessarily think they do a good job of balancing the heightened stuff with the more serious and like realistic, you know, horror that's going on with the monsters and whatnot. This episode has more in line with, like, say episode 3, I think, with well, at least the heightened elements of episode 3, and then also like some of the creature stuff in episode 1. But it's all really different, I guess. I feel like tonally we have, like, you know, episodes that are like blended really well. Like episode 6 is slowly becoming my favorite in the series, I think. And then episode 5 as well, which also does a great job of doing that. But then like episode 4, it feels a little goofy, and then it gets kind of serious at times, but then it doesn't quite work. And then episode 2 is, you know, way out there and whatnot. And so it's just like there's this weird sort of imbalance of like, I don't know how you want me to take the show. I understand it's supposed to be kind of like an anthology series, but there is an overarching story. And I feel like when I take a step back, there is so much tonal mismatch throughout the entirety of the show, and especially with this episode, that I sort of struggle with how to interpret the show at times. Like, it's not like, and Gretchen, we were literally talking about this. It's not like Westworld. It's not like you know,
Watchmen.
Yeah, exactly.
I want it to be Watchmen so badly, but it doesn't have that egg feel. You know, like how
it doesn't
reference it. goes back around and around.
Yeah, well, and that's a really good point, is I think Watchmen, I mean, these are two completely different shows doing different but similar things, but I think Watchmen balanced the heightened elements with realism really well. This show, I get it's a little more like pulpy, just given the nature of what it is and such, but I don't feel like there's that balance there that a show like Watchmen necessarily had. There are single episodes that really stand out and do a great job, but as a whole, it is a bit of a mixed bag for me. I don't know if you guys feel the same, but
yeah, I think my thing is a lack of consequences for our characters' actions thus far. Just dating back to episode 1 with police dying, and no one's looking for the who killed these black people. Obviously, there's the monsters, so they might have just associated with they died, due to the fact of monsters. There's a lack of like consequences with, Ruby putting a shoe up a white man's ass and him, nothing coming of that. And, so there are just like a lack of consequences to our characters' actions, which I hope that from the lack, what happened at the end of this episode with her leaving that magazine or comic book there, that we'll see some, again, it's a tough balance. Okay, we know that this show is all about, compared to Watchmen, generational trauma. We don't want to see this black cast die, dude. I mean, we want to see them have a strong line. We don't want to see them continue to get traumatized and get beaten and get killed. But there is a lack of like the consequences of their actions, of all these adventures that were going on, breaking into a museum and no one seems to care that no one broke into a museum. So there are little things I guess we can put aside, but I would like to see at least some consequences be, like I said, be addressed for everything we've seen so far. So, well,
that's the thing. I don't feel like we've gotten real consequences since episode 2, right? Like that was, I mean, there was a little bit of it in episode 3 when, Letty smashed the cars, obviously, and then she was like taken in by the police officers and stuff like that. Yeah, that was probably the last time I think I noticed some of the consequences for what happened. But like episode 2, really, with George dying and stuff like that, that was sort of like, oh, okay, if they're gonna,
stakes are high.
The stakes are high. But I agree with you. Since then, it hasn't necessarily gotten back to that. But yeah, sorry, Gretchen, going to you.
Oh, yeah. No, I was just going to say, when we say consequences, we don't mean literally like we want them to suffer consequences. I think it's more we just want there to be like another scene where it shows them knocking on the door, or like maybe we see Christina dealing with all of the mess that they make, because ultimately she's using them for her goal, so she's cleaning it up. It's just like we need a little bit of like a scene of somebody magicking away these things. Like I would actually believe that if Christina was like following them and like cleaning it up, because she's basically using them to get the book to her. So that's all I need. Just a little bit of a connective tissue between episodes.
And we may get that, Hippolyta now having this time travel ability. Maybe she is their savior. She's been picking up the pieces, fixing the timelines, fixing their mistakes that they have gathered so far. So we still have 3 episodes to have some of those things addressed. So
yeah. And I would love to see that near the end half of the season. I really want to see where she goes. I would love to know if like all the things that she picked up, where she was like a risque dancer, a literal warrior, an adventurer, like are those skills that are a part of her now? And when she comes back, are we going to see like a really badass Hippolyta? Are we going to see Dee change? Is she going to go back in time and save her? And I know I'm pretty sure their names are references to like Wonder Woman. So so I would love to see, or obviously like mythology, but like maybe we lean into the Wonder Woman aspect, and maybe they'll change together. I don't know, but it's an exciting prospect. Like I feel like depending on how they play out the next 3 episodes, it could save all of the critiques I've had for the whole show.
Yeah, that's a good point. We do still have 3 episodes left, so like you said, there's so much that could be fixed in that, and things could sort of piece together. And then also I'm assuming they'll want to continue this. I don't think it's going to just be a limited series, one-off season. So I'll be curious to see how they plant the seeds for next season, and then maybe like how long are they going to prolong the confrontation between like the I guess the Freeman family and Christina and stuff like that with the Book of Names and stuff. So I don't know. I'll be really curious to see how that all plays out. But guys, the most important thing is, again, what did you all think? Did you love this episode? Are you a little bit mixed? Are you digging the direction the show is going? Let us know all your thoughts and opinions down in the comment section below. Let's have a great discussion down there. Thank you to my two guests for joining me today, Elliott, Gretchen. Gretchen, where can everyone find you?
I'm on Twitter at Gretchen_Smail, and I am at Bustle. I have some articles, reacts coming out for Lovecraft Country and also Bly Manor and Utopia, so keep an eye out for those.
Go check them out. And Elliott, where can everyone find you?
Yeah, again, I love talking this show with you all, so thank you again for having me on. But yeah, guys, you can find me here at YouTube talking about shows like this, Utopia, The Boys, Raised by Wolves, Ted Lasso, so on and so forth. So definitely check me out here on YouTube, and then again on other social media platforms, sharing my thoughts and opinions on movie news and TV news on Twitter and on Instagram at Movie Files.
Yes, and Movie Files is the biggest Ted Lasso fan I think I know. So that is,
no one's talking about
such
an underrated great show, guys. Watch some Ted Lasso if you want to see a good, charming, funny, dramatic show.
Yeah, for sure. But anyways, guys, if you haven't done so already, be sure to like this video, share with your friends, and subscribe to the FilmSpeak channel so you don't miss another Lovecraft recap show, and you stay up to date on the rest of our film and television coverage over here. You can also like FilmSpeak on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, just search FilmSpeak, and if you like me specifically, and you like what I have to say, you can give me a follow on Twitter at Griff Schiller. All right, guys, we'll see you back here for next week's episode, and until then, take care.